I was there, standing in front of the completely empty blue velvet box, feeling my world collapse like a house of cards in the wind. My hands trembled holding that box that for decades had guarded not just jewelry, but pieces of my soul, memories crystallized in gold and precious stones. The emptiness staring back at me wasn't just physical, it was a black hole sucking away all the trust I had placed in the only person I had left in the world, my daughter Claire. The sound of her high heels echoed through the hallway, approaching the room where I stood petrified. She was humming, probably still intoxicated by the euphoria of the lavish party she had organized, a party that, as I had just discovered, was paid for with the jewelry of my entire life. Each step she took hammered in my heart like nails being driven into a coffin, the coffin of our relationship. Mom, you should have seen it. It was the most beautiful party I've ever organized. Claire entered radiant, her eyes shining with satisfaction, completely oblivious to the hurricane that was about to sweep through our family. The decoration was perfect, the catering was magazine-worthy, and Marcus's family was enchanted. I finally got to show what I'm capable of. Show what she's capable of. Those words echoed in my mind like cruel irony. Yes, she had shown what she was capable of violating a mother's trust, capable of transforming decades of sacrifice into a single night of vanity, capable of erasing an entire family's history to impress people who barely knew her. I raised the blue box toward her, feeling every muscle in my body tremble with a mixture of pain and revolt I had never experienced. Claire, where are my jewels? The silence that followed was deafening. I saw the smile melt from my daughter's face like paint dissolving in rain. Her eyes, which seconds ago were shining with joy, now reflected the panic of a child caught red-handed. But Claire was no longer a child. She was a 32-year-old woman who had just broken her mother's heart into 1,000 pieces. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, I need to go back to the beginning. I need to tell you about who I was before becoming this destroyed woman, holding an empty box as if it were the last piece of my dignity. My name is Carmen, I'm 65 years old, and for 43 of them I was a single mother. When Claire was born, I was only 22, and had just discovered that the man who swore he loved me had disappeared the moment he learned of the pregnancy. There was no discussion, no explanations. I simply woke up one day, and he was no longer there, leaving only a cowardly letter on the kitchen table saying he wasn't ready to be a father. Ready or not, I would be a mother, and I would be the best mother that child could have. I worked as a seamstress in a small garment factory downtown. My fingers bled in the first weeks, pricked by needles, but I persisted. Each stitch made was a step toward a better future for Claire. I woke up at 5 in the morning, prepared the bottle, left my daughter with Mrs. Eulalia, the neighbor who became a second mother to both of us, and walked 3 kilometers to work to save the bus fare money. The first jewels came with much sacrifice. The white gold ring was bought with my first Christmas bonus. I had saved every penny for months, eating only bread with margarine for lunch to manage to gather the money. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a symbol. It was my way of telling the world that I didn't need a man to have value, to have dignity, to be complete. The emerald necklace came years later, when I finally managed to open my own sewing workshop. Claire was 8 years old and I worked until late hours to manage to pay the rent for the small space and still support our home. I remember perfectly the day I entered Mr. Anthony's jewelry store, a kind gentleman who knew my story and offered me special payment conditions. "Mrs. Carmen," he said, "a woman like you deserves to wear something beautiful from time to time." I cried that day. I cried because for the first time in years, I felt that all the effort was worthwhile. When I got home and showed the necklace to Claire, she was amazed. "Mommy, you look like a princess," she said with her little eyes shining with admiration. I wore the necklace to her confirmation at age 9, and I felt like the most powerful woman in the world. The diamond earrings were the last item in the collection. Claire was already in college, an achievement that cost sleepless nights sewing party dresses for wealthy ladies from the upscale neighborhood of the city. I had managed to get her a partial scholarship to study business administration, but still needed to cover expenses for materials, transportation, and food. It was 5 years of absolute deprivation. 5 years in which I didn't buy a new outfit for myself, didn't go to the movies, didn't eat in restaurants, everything so that Claire could have what I never had, a higher education. When she graduated, I decided to give myself a present. The earrings cost 3 months of my salary, but they represented a victory. Claire had become an educated, intelligent woman with a bright future ahead. I had fulfilled my mission as a mother, or at least that's what I thought. Claire met Marcus at the company where she started working as an administrative assistant. He came from a traditional family in the city, with businesses established for generations. When she introduced the young man to me, I immediately noticed the class difference between them. Marcus was polite, well-dressed, had that air of someone who never had to fight for anything in life, but Claire was in love, and seeing my daughter happy was all I wanted. The wedding was simple, as our resources allowed. I had saved money for 2 years to have a dignified party, although modest. Claire was beautiful in the dress I had sewn myself, working for weeks so that every detail would be perfect. Marcus seemed happy, his family was polite, and for a moment I believed that finally my daughter would have the stable life I had always dreamed of for her. But wealthy families are complex, and I would soon discover that education doesn't necessarily mean kindness. Claire's mother-in-law, Mrs. Margaret, was an imposing woman, one of those who use money as social armor. From the beginning, she made it clear that Claire didn't completely meet the family's expectations. They weren't direct criticisms, it was worse than that. They were subtle comments, veiled comparisons, suggestions that Claire could do more for the family. "It's a shame that Claire doesn't have the means to contribute more to family festivities," she once said in my presence, during a Sunday lunch. "The other daughters-in-law always organize such elegant events." I saw my daughter shrink before those words. I saw the confidence I had built in her over the years begin to crack. And the worst part, there was nothing I could do to protect her from that subtle violence that is classism disguised as education. Claire began to change. She started worrying excessively about appearances, comparing our simple home with her husband's family mansion, feeling smaller for coming from humble origins. I tried to talk to her, remind her that our dignity wasn't in the material things we possessed, but in the people we were. But the words of a seamstress mother no longer seemed to carry weight against the demands of a wealthy family. And if you're following this story and identifying with this silent pain that many women carry, know that you're not alone. Stay with us for more accounts like this, because sometimes we need to hear other stories to understand that our strength is greater than we imagine. It was months of growing tension. Claire visited me less and less, and when she came she seemed distant, worried, as if she carried an invisible weight on her shoulders. I knew something was happening, but she insisted that everything was fine, that it was just work stress and married life. The truth is that Marcus's family had found my daughter's deepest wound, the inferiority complex, and like all emotional predators, they knew exactly how to press that wound to get what they wanted. The perfect opportunity arose when Marcus's grandmother turned 70. Mrs. Margaret suggested it would be wonderful if Claire organized a party worthy of the importance of the family matriarch. It was a subtle trap. If Claire refused, she would be seen as uninterested. If she accepted, she would have to find resources she didn't possess. And that's when my daughter made the mistake that would destroy our relationship. For weeks, Claire had visited our house more frequently, always going up to the attic to reminisce about childhood. I found this sudden nostalgia touching, not imagining that she was actually studying where I kept my treasures. She knew that I polished the jewelry once a month, always on the first Monday, and that during this process they were exposed on my bedroom dresser. On the morning of the party, while I was at the market shopping, Claire entered the house using the key I had given her years before, a key that represented total trust, unrestricted access to my world. She went up to my room, opened the blue velvet box, and took away 43 years of my life. It wasn't just the jewelry she sold, it was much more than that. The white gold ring represented my independence, my ability to be complete without a man by my side. The emerald necklace symbolized the victory of a simple woman who managed to build her own business in a male-dominated world. The diamond earrings were the materialization of a mother's sacrifice who gave up everything to educate her daughter. But there was something more, something Claire didn't know, and that made her betrayal even more devastating. Among the jewelry was a small silver pendant, discreet, almost insignificant compared to the other pieces. On it was engraved the name Gabriel, my first son, who died during childbirth 2 years before Claire was born. That pendant was made by a goldsmith friend of the family, using silver from a bracelet my mother had given me. It was the only physical memory I had of the boy who could have been Claire's brother. I never told Claire about Gabriel. It was too deep, too private a pain. But whenever I looked at that pendant, I felt that somehow he still existed, that he was part of our family even in absence. Claire had sold the memory of a brother she never knew. When she came home that afternoon, radiant with happiness over the successful party, I felt a mixture of emotions that almost made me faint. It was as if the person I had created, loved and protected for more than 3 decades, had died and been replaced by a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Mom, listen to me. I swear I was going to tell you. It was just for a good cause," she said when she finally managed to speak after minutes of terrifying silence. "It was important for Marcus's family. It was his grandmother's birthday. They never had the means to throw a real party." The irony of those words hit me like a slap. They never had the means. The richest family in the city never had the means to throw a party? Or was Claire so blinded by the need for approval that she could no longer distinguish reality from manipulation? "You sold my jewelry?" I asked, and my voice came out as a hoarse whisper, as if the words were being torn from my throat. "They weren't just jewelry, Mom. It was a gesture, a sacrifice, for love. His family needed me, and me. Did you think about me, about each memory kept in that velvet, about each tear that fell to buy each piece?" That's when Claire broke down. Between sobs, she tried to explain the pressure she felt, the constant comparisons, the subtle comments about her social inadequacy. She talked about how Marcus's family made her feel small, insignificant, as if she constantly needed to prove her worth. The grandmother's party was her chance to finally be accepted, to show that she too could contribute to the family's grandeur. But while listening to her justifications, I realized something terrible. My daughter had become a distorted version of everything I had tried to teach her. Instead of being proud of her origins, she felt shame. Instead of valuing honest work, she sought shortcuts to impress. Instead of recognizing the manipulation she was a victim of, she had become an accomplice. "Claire," I said, sitting heavily on the sofa, "you have no idea what you've done." And then I told her about Gabriel, about the son she never knew she had a brother, about the pendant that carried his name, about how that small piece of silver was my way of keeping alive the memory of a love that lasted only a few hours of life. I saw Claire's face completely fall apart. The realization of what she had done hit her like an avalanche. She hadn't just sold jewelry, she had sold the memory of a brother. She had violated a grief I had carried in silence for more than 30 years. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know, Claire, because you didn't ask. You didn't talk to me. You simply decided that your needs were more important than my entire life." The days that followed were the darkest of my existence. I locked myself at home, didn't answer the phone, didn't open the door. I felt as if I had lost not only the jewelry, but also my daughter. The Claire I had raised would never do such a thing. The woman who invaded my house and sold my memories was a stranger. Mrs. Eulalia, my neighbor and friend of decades, forced her way in on the third day. She found me in bed, without eating, without bathing, just staring at the ceiling as if expecting the answers to be written there. "Carmen," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "you can't let yourself die because of this." She sold Gabriel, Eulalia. She sold the memory of my boy. Mrs. Eulalia cried with me that afternoon. She was the only living person who knew about Gabriel, who had been by my side during those terrible days in the hospital. She understood that this wasn't just about jewelry, it was about the violation of the most sacred thing a mother can have. But while I was wasting away in my room, Claire had begun her own journey. A journey I would only discover weeks later. She had left our discussion in a state of shock. The revelation about Gabriel had affected her in a way she never imagined possible. For the first time, Claire truly understood what she had done. It hadn't been just a loan of her mother's jewelry. It had been the destruction of an entire family history. The first thing she did was confront Marcus's family. During all those months of pressure and manipulation, she had believed she was being accepted, that she had finally found her place among them. But now, with the clarity that comes from desperation, she began to see the truth. Mrs. Margaret received Claire in the main hall of her mansion, surrounded by Persian rugs and antique furniture that seemed like silent witnesses to generations of privilege. When Claire explained that she needed to undo the party, that the jewelry wasn't hers to sell, that she had made a terrible mistake, the reaction was revealing. "Dear," said Mrs. Margaret with an icy smile, "a party that's been thrown can't be undone, and debts assumed must be honored. You were very generous, and I'm sure your mother will understand it was for a good cause." It was at that moment that Claire finally saw clearly. She wasn't seen as part of the family, she was seen as a useful tool. Her humble origin wasn't an obstacle to be overcome, it was a weakness to be exploited. Marcus's family had found in Claire exactly what they were looking for, someone desperate for acceptance, willing to make any sacrifice to feel included. Marcus, when confronted by his wife, showed his true face. "Claire, you're being dramatic. It was just a loan of your mother's jewelry. When our financial situation improves, we'll replace everything." "Loan? I sold the jewelry, Marcus, and one of them had my dead brother's name on it." "Dead brother? What story is this? You never told me about any brother." The coldness with which he said that, as if my family's pain were irrelevant, as if Gabriel were just an inconvenient detail in the narrative they had constructed, was the moment when Claire woke up from the toxic dream she had gotten lost in. That same day, she began a desperate search for the jewelry buyers. She discovered that some had been sold to local dealers, others to private collectors, and some even to people from other cities. The ring and necklace had already been resold. The earrings were in a jewelry store in New York. But Gabriel's pendant, the pendant had been bought by a young couple who planned to melt down the silver to make wedding rings. Claire drove 300 miles in a single morning. She arrived at the couple's house at 7 in the morning, rang the doorbell until she woke them up, and begged, literally knelt at their doorstep for them to return the pendant. She told the entire story, about me, about Gabriel, about the terrible mistake she had made. The couple, moved by her desperation, agreed to return the piece, but they wanted back the money they had paid. Claire had no money, she had spent everything on the party, so she sold her car, she sold her personal jewelry, she sold clothes, shoes, everything of value she had. For an entire month she lived this obsessive routine. She would wake up early, take buses or hitchhike to travel the city and neighboring cities, searching for any trace of the other pieces. She couldn't find everything, but she found some, and with each piece recovered, she felt like she was sewing back pieces of her mother's soul. But the most important thing she managed, Gabriel's pendant. Meanwhile, I remained isolated at home. Mrs. Eulalia came every day, forced me to eat something, tried to convince me to get out of bed, but I felt as if part of me had died along with the trust I had placed in my daughter. One afternoon, she brought information that made me sit up in bed for the first time in weeks. "Carmen, you need to know. Claire separated from Marcus." I didn't respond, but I felt something move inside my chest. A small spark of what? Hope? Pride? Relief? "And there's more," continued Mrs. Eulalia. "She's looking for your jewelry. She's selling everything she has to try to buy them back." That's when I understood that maybe the Claire I had raised still existed. Maybe she was buried under layers of insecurity and manipulation, but she was still there. There was still salvation for both of us. On December 1st, exactly 1 month after our argument, Claire appeared at my door. She was thin, with deep circles under her eyes, wearing simple clothes I didn't recognize. She seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks, but her eyes had something I hadn't seen in a long time: true humility. "Mom," she said, and her voice was a broken whisper, "I need to talk to you." I opened the door, not because I had forgiven her, I wasn't ready for that yet, but because I recognized in my daughter the same desperation I had felt so many times in life. The desperation of someone who has lost everything and needs to find a way back. We sat in the living room, the same living room where a month before our family had imploded. Claire was holding a small white box in her trembling hands. "I couldn't recover everything," she said. "The ring and necklace were sold to collectors in other cities. The earrings are with a jeweler who doesn't want to negotiate. But this here," she opened the box, revealing the small silver pendant with Gabriel's name engraved. "This I brought back." I took the pendant with trembling hands. It was like holding a piece of my heart that had been returned to my chest. I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since the day Gabriel died. I cried for the pain of loss, for the pain of betrayal, but also for the relief of knowing that memory hadn't been lost forever. "Claire," I said when I could speak again, "do you have any idea what went through my mind this month?" "I do, Mom, because I went through the same thing. I discovered that I knew nothing about the woman who raised me. I discovered that I had a brother and never knew it. I discovered that I'm a daughter who caused her own mother the greatest pain of her life." "And what did you discover about yourself?" Claire took a deep breath before answering. "I discovered that I got lost trying to be someone I'm not. I discovered that there's a difference between admiring rich people and humiliating yourself for them. I discovered that the approval I was so desperately seeking would never come, because the people who manipulated me had no intention of truly accepting me. And Marcus showed that he's exactly like his family. When I needed my husband's support to fix the mistake I made because of him, he said I was being hysterical, and that it wasn't his fault if I had misinterpreted the family's suggestions. For the first time in a month, I felt something like pride in my daughter. She had awakened, she had seen clearly, she had had the courage to walk away from toxic people, even if it meant being alone. "Claire, I don't know if I can forgive you now. It was a very deep betrayal." "I know, Mom, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I learned. I'm asking for a chance to be again the daughter you deserve." "How?" "By working, saving, returning, piece by piece, jewel by jewel, everything I took from you. It might take years, it might take decades, but I will return it. And more important than that, I will return the trust I broke." I looked at my daughter, this 32-year-old woman who seemed to have been reborn from her own ashes, and saw something extraordinary happening. For the first time in her life, Claire wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't seeking approval. She wasn't apologizing for being who she was or where she came from. She was simply taking responsibility for her actions and willing to work to fix what she had broken. "You know it's going to be very difficult, don't you? Rebuilding our relationship." "I know, Mom, but if there's one thing I learned watching you all these years, it's that the most valuable things in life are those we work hardest for." And it was at that moment that I understood something fundamental. My daughter had finally learned the most important lesson I had tried to teach her throughout her life. Dignity can't be bought, can't be inherited, can't be gained by association. Dignity is built, day by day, through difficult choices and honest work. The months that followed were of slow and painful reconstruction. Claire got 2 jobs. She worked as a secretary during the day and as a waitress at night. Every extra penny was saved in a savings account destined for rebuying my jewelry. She visited me every Sunday, always bringing some news about her research. She had found a jeweler willing to negotiate the earrings, or discovered the whereabouts of the necklace at an auction in another city. But the most important thing wasn't the jewelry she managed to recover. The most important thing was the woman she was becoming in the process. The insecure Claire, desperate for approval, had been replaced by a determined woman who worked hard and wasn't ashamed of her own origins. She had gone back to wearing simple clothes without caring about judgments. She had learned to cook to save money. She had discovered the pleasure of earning things through her own merit. And me, I was learning to forgive, not just Claire, but also myself. For years I questioned whether I had failed as a mother, whether I hadn't given her the right tools to face the world. But now I understood that some lessons can only be learned through pain. Claire needed to fall to learn to get up. She needed to get lost to find herself. In March of the following year, she arrived home with a familiar box in her hands. It was a blue velvet box, identical to the one I kept in the attic. Inside it, carefully organized, were 3 pieces: Gabriel's pendant, one of the diamond earrings she had managed to negotiate, and a surprise that made me cry again. "Mom," she said, "I couldn't find your original ring, but I had a new one made, with the same specifications, at the same goldsmith where you bought the first one. It was a white gold ring, simple and elegant, exactly like the original. But this one had a difference. On the inside, it was engraved, 'For Carmen, from your daughter who learned the value of love.' Claire, I know it's not the same thing. I know this ring doesn't have the same history as the previous one, but I wanted you to know that I understood what it represented. I understood that it wasn't about gold or precious stones. It was about independence, about strength, about the courage of a woman who faced the world alone and won." Our Sunday conversations now are different. We talk about business, about dreams, about plans for the future, but we also talk about Gabriel, about the difficulties I faced raising her alone, about the moments of doubt I had as a mother. Our relationship became more honest, deeper, more real. Claire recently asked me if I had completely forgiven her. I answered honestly, "Forgiveness isn't a switch that you turn on and off. It's a choice we make every day. And every day I choose to forgive you, because every day you give me reasons to be proud of the woman you've become." The truth is that our story doesn't end with a fairy tale happily ever after. It ends with something more realistic and perhaps more beautiful. The understanding that true relationships are built not just in moments of joy, but especially in how we face moments of pain together. Claire couldn't recover all my jewelry, but she returned something infinitely more valuable to me: the confidence that I raised a daughter capable of growing, of changing, of becoming better. And I learned that a mother's love isn't unconditional just in easy times. It's especially unconditional in times when our children most need us to believe in their capacity for redemption. If you've made it this far in this story, maybe it's because you too have gone through situations where you had to choose between resentment and forgiveness, between giving up on someone or believing in their capacity for change. Life constantly presents us with these choices, and there are no easy answers. What I can share is this: forgiveness isn't a favor we do for others, it's a gift we give ourselves. And the second chance we give to people we love can be the catalyst for extraordinary transformations. Claire needed to fall to learn to fly, and I needed to almost lose my daughter to discover how truly strong our bond is. Today, when I look at Claire organizing simple and beautiful events for families who, like us, celebrate with their hearts more than with money, I see that she finally found her place in the world. She no longer needs to impress anyone, because she impresses herself every day with her integrity and dedication. And when she visits me on Sundays, bringing flowers from the neighbor's garden and stories about the events she organized during the week, I feel that we are more than mother and daughter. We are 2 women who learned that true wealth lies in the capacity to love, forgive, and start over, as many times as necessary. Our blue velvet box may never be completely full again, but our hearts are. And in the end, we discovered that's what always mattered. Not the value of the jewelry we kept, but the value of the love we shared, even or especially in moments when that love was put to the test. This is our story. A story about mistakes and successes, about betrayal and forgiveness, about daughters who get lost and mothers who never give up. A story about discovering that we are stronger than we imagine, and that true love always finds a way back home.